On my first birthday as a widow, my son gave me an unexpected gift, the leashes of the 4 dogs I had given him as a present. "We're going to the beach with my mother-in-law," he said, without looking me in the eyes, before adding, "Deal with those mutts yourself." He expected me to spend the day crying over the cake I made for us. Little did he know that while he was traveling, I would be busy dismantling, piece by piece, the luxurious life I was paying for him. His lesson was just beginning. Here I am, Jack, a 68-year-old man whose hair, once a rebellious brown, is now silver threads, woven by long nights spent in front of a drafting table or, later, a computer screen. Life, for me, has always been a project, a meticulous construction, a blueprint to be executed with millimeter precision. That's how I built Phoenix Engineering. From nothing, from a small, borrowed office in my father's garage, to the skyscrapers we now design and build across the country. Every brick, every beam, every circuit board in that company held a piece of my soul, my sweat, my hopes. I breathed and lived for that company, but even more so, I built it for her, for Sophia, my only daughter. She was the reason for my ceaseless effort, the North Star that drove me through every project. I remember when she was little, running through the factory corridors, her curious eyes following the workers, her tiny hands trying to reach for the large screwdrivers I used. In those moments, I saw my legacy, not just in concrete and steel, but in her shining eyes. All the bedtime stories I told her weren't about princesses or knights, but about the beauty of engineering, about how things fit together perfectly when you had a good plan. I wanted her to fall in love with what I loved, to build her own world with the same passion. And so I prepared the ground for her. She studied engineering, brilliantly, I confess. She joined the company, climbed every rung, learned every detail, or so I believed. My intention was clear: to pass the crown, to hand her control of everything I had built with such care. It wasn't just a business. It was a part of who we were. I decided to make her the majority partner, granting her 50% of the power, not on a whim, but as the final act of my unwavering trust in her. It would be the formality that sealed our future, a celebration of the transition, the consolidation of my greatest project, my daughter's future. I, who had always believed more in blueprints than in words, saw in that act the purest manifestation of my love and faith. The top-floor boardroom, with its commanding view of the city we helped shape, was the perfect stage for that day. The morning sun flooded the room, reflecting off the polished table where so many plans had been born. The other directors and managers were present, familiar faces, some of whom had been with me from the beginning. Expectation hung in the air. I smiled, proud, watching Sophia sit across from me, next to the man she had chosen, her fiancé, an ambitious young man she had recently appointed as vice president. I imagined it would be a routine meeting, signing papers, a few speeches of gratitude, a toast to the future. But what unfolded next was, for me, like taking a blow to the chest in slow motion. She stood up. Her eyes, once filled with that childish curiosity, now reflected a coldness I had never seen. They didn't seem to recognize me. The smile that graced her face did not reach her eyes. Her fiancé, beside her, had an air of restrained triumph. My throat went dry. Something was wrong. "Your vision is outdated, Dad," she said, her voice firm, cutting, the words echoing in the silent room like hammer blows. Each syllable was a strike, and the room, once filled with light, seemed to darken around me. I tried to form a response, but the words wouldn't come. My brain, accustomed to calculations and strategies, was malfunctioning, unable to process what was happening. Then came the final blow. In front of everyone who had watched me build that place, in front of men and women who had shared my sweat and dreams. She looked me up and down. "We don't need you here anymore. You're useless." That term, useless, that word from my own daughter's mouth pierced me deeper than any blade. The girl to whom I read bedtime stories, whom I taught to tie her shoes, to whom I dedicated every second of my adult life, was now looking at me as if I were a burden, an unwanted relic of the past. My world, built with such solidity, shattered into 1,000 pieces before my eyes. I thought she had won. I lowered my head. There was no argument, no words of defense. My body, once erect, seemed to shrink. The shock was overwhelming, the pain excruciating. I felt the stares of the other directors, a mixture of embarrassment and perhaps even pity, but I didn't have the courage to face them. I just stood up slowly and began to walk toward the door of that room, which now felt like a battlefield where I had been defeated. Each step was heavy, as if my feet were stuck in cement. The silence of my departure was the biggest mistake she ever made, I realized later. But at that moment, it was just an oppressive silence, the sound of my life being torn from me. I felt I had lost everything. I had lost Sophia. That night, sleep refused me. The image of her cold eyes haunted me. The word useless reverberated in my mind like a cruel echo. I had given everything, and I received nothing. The next day, the sun seemed dimmer. Breakfast had no taste. I was in my home office, trying to piece together the fragments of my own being, when the phone rang. The number for Phoenix Engineering flashed on the screen. I hesitated, but answered. The voice on the other end, once so confident, was now laced with panic. "Dad, the production line has stopped. None of the machines are responding," she screamed. There was panic in her voice. The first crack in her facade, as a ruthless CEO, Ike, from my home office, took a sip of coffee before answering, and the bitter taste mixed with a sudden sense of clarity. The real meeting was just beginning. "I know, sweetheart," I replied, my voice calm, contrasting with her desperation on the other end of the line. The sound of my sip of coffee was almost imperceptible, but to me, it was a reminder that I was still there, whole, and that things were far from over. Sophia let out a small, stifled cry, a mixture of fury and disbelief. "What do you mean, you know? What did you do? Are you sabotaging the company, Dad? I can't believe this." She fired off, the words tumbling over each other. I could picture her brow furrowed, her hair disheveled, nervously biting her nails, the same look I saw when she was a child and a toy wouldn't work. But this wasn't a toy, and the problem wasn't so simple to fix. "I'm not sabotaging anything." "Sophia," I clarified, keeping my tone gentle, almost didactic. "It's just that the operating system that controls all the factory automation, the heart of the company, as you used to call it, is a patent registered in my personal name, a piece of personal intellectual property that I licensed to the company while I was CEO." There was a heavy silence on the other end, a silence that spoke of shock and a painful realization. I waited. Suddenly, the machine she thought was hers, a machine I had built with my own hands and my own mind, revealed it had a remote control that was, and always had been, in my hands. She thought she had inherited a castle, but I had taken the keys. Her breathing became more audible, ragged. I could feel the anger growing, mixed with panic. "What does that mean, Dad?" she asked, her voice now a hoarse, almost imperceptible whisper. I gripped the coffee mug in my hand, feeling the warmth through the ceramic. "It means, my dear, that since I was deemed useless and fired, the license was automatically revoked. It's in Clause 12B of the partnership agreement you signed without reading. The one your fiancé, the new VP, swore was airtight." There was no triumph in my voice, just the statement of a cold, irrefutable fact. The lesson was beginning. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost feel the impact of my revelation, the ground collapsing beneath her feet. The company, without my software, was just a warehouse full of useless metal, silent machines, and still gears. All the years of effort, of audacious projects, of innovations that put us ahead of the competition. All of it depended on a single system, a single code, the essence I had injected into every machine. And that essence had now been withdrawn. I had built Phoenix with a vision, a soul, and Sophia, in her rush to seize power, had forgotten that a soul cannot be transferred with the stroke of a pen. She thought she could discard the creator, but she didn't count on the creator having left an indelible, vital link. Her first reaction, undoubtedly dictated by the fiancé who was now advising her, was one of pure defiance. A few hours after the phone call, the news reached me from various sources. They were hiring the best software engineers in the country, offering fortunes, stratospheric salaries, and unimaginable bonuses to try to crack my code, to create a similar system, or perhaps even to try to steal mine. I smiled bitterly. It was the arrogance of youth, the belief that everything can be bought or forced. They didn't understand that some things are more than algorithms. They are the manifestation of a lifetime. That same day, I received a call from a friend in the industry, one of those who knew the story of Phoenix since the garage days. He informed me that the company was in chaos, that the machines were idle, the employees directionless, and production completely stagnant. This was the first setback Sophia and her fiancé hadn't anticipated. The illusion that they could simply replace me and move on had shattered with the total production halt. They had underestimated the complexity of my creation. My system wasn't just software, it was the work of 30 years, an architecture so complex and personal that replicating it would take years, perhaps decades. It was the result of every mistake, every success, every intuition I had along my journey. I sat in my favorite armchair, an old engineering book in my hands, but I couldn't read a word. Memories of the early days of Phoenix returned with stunning clarity. The sleepless nights, the smell of solder, the cold coffee, and the indescribable joy of seeing a prototype come to life for the first time. That wasn't just technology, it was art, the art of giving life to what was once inanimate. And now that life was suspended, the company was in a coma, and only I had the key to wake it up. I felt no pleasure in seeing her suffer, but a part of me knew this was the only way she would see the truth, the only way she would understand the value of what she had discarded. The following days were marked by a strange silence from the company. No calls, no attempts at direct contact. Communication was indirect, through rumors and news that reached me. I knew they were in the midst of a battle, trying everything to get around the situation. I could imagine the tension in those boardrooms, the growing frustration, the heated arguments between Sophia and her fiancé, her pride wounded and his ambition in check. I knew their next move wouldn't be long in coming, and it wouldn't be simple. The calm before the storm was palpable, and I prepared myself for what was to come because I knew the challenge would be even greater, and the pain, inevitably, would be too. The calm was short-lived, as I expected. The silence from Phoenix Engineering was just the breath before the roar. Desperate and unsuccessful in their attempt to crack my code, after all, 30 years of dedication cannot be replicated in a few days. They changed tactics. The battle moved from the field of technology to that of public opinion. It started subtly, with leaks to business news portals, then gained traction in newspaper columns, and finally flooded social media. The narrative was always the same: a retired visionary, me, a bitter old man, sabotaging the future of the company he himself had founded, all for ego and revenge. They painted me as a villain, an obstacle to progress, someone who refused to let the new generation take the reins. The words were sharp, calculated to damage my reputation, to isolate me. Phoenix founder, Jack Miller, acting in bad faith, halting technological advancement and harming hundreds of employee families, read one headline. Another insinuated, "Is it a case of power jealousy or an inability to accept retirement?" The public pressure was immense. I, who had always dedicated myself to building, to creating, now found myself being deconstructed, slandered, turned into a caricature of a bitter man. That hurt, not because of the image they painted of me. I knew who I was and what I had built, but because I saw Sophia participating in it, allowing my name to be dragged through the mud. How could the daughter I raised, whom I taught about ethics and integrity, agree to such a strategy? I wondered if she truly believed the lies they were spreading, or if she was being manipulated by her fiancé. That doubt was like a thorn, more painful than any headline. I saw her as a hostage to her own ambition, a piece in a game she might not fully understand. In the midst of this storm of accusations, my phone rang. It was a number I knew well, but one that hadn't called in days. It was Mark, my lead hardware engineer. Mark was more than a colleague. He was a brother, a man of few words but unwavering loyalty, who had been with me since the garage days. I remember him, a skinny, eager young man, helping to assemble the first circuits. His hair, once jet black, now had the same silver hue as mine, and the lines on his face told stories of many sleepless nights by my side. His voice on the phone was tense, filled with a concern that went beyond the professional. "Mr. Miller," he began, the formality indicating the gravity of the situation, something he rarely used with me. "I can't stand to see what's happening here anymore." His tone was low, almost a whisper, as if he feared being overheard. My heart sank. Mark was not one to complain. If he was calling, it was because something very serious was happening. I encouraged him to continue, assuring him it was safe to talk to me. He took a deep breath, and what he revealed sent a chill down my spine. A premonition that the situation was even worse than I had imagined. "They're cannibalizing the machines, sir," he said, his voice thick with sadness and indignation. "And they're dismantling parts, taking critical components from perfectly good machines to sell them off. They're trying to cover payroll, but it's a stopgap. It's like dismantling a body to sell the organs. The company is being gutted from the inside." I closed my eyes. This was an act of desperation, an unthinkable measure for anyone who truly cared about the future of Phoenix. It was like watching a child being mutilated. I knew the financial situation must be deteriorating rapidly for them to resort to this. The internal chaos was evident, and Sophia's inexperience, combined with her fiancé's greed, was leading the company into an abyss. Mark paused, and I could hear a faint noise, as if he were making sure no one was listening. "And there's more, sir," he continued, his voice even lower, a tone of urgency now. "Her fiancé is in secret negotiations. He's been meeting with strange people, outside the company, in discreet places. I don't know for sure what it's about, but I've overheard fragmented conversations about irresistible offers and new plans." Mark's words echoed in my mind. Secret negotiations, irresistible offers. It sounded sinister. This wasn't just about saving the company, it was about something else. Something darker, more dangerous. Mark's revelation opened a new crack in my understanding of the situation. It wasn't just a matter of Sophia being ambitious or reckless. There was a treacherous element at play, a shadow lurking in the wings. The fiancé, Ryan. I'd always had my reservations about him. A man with a gleam in his eye that seemed more like a predator's than a partner's. But Sophia loved him, or at least she thought she did. I had trusted her judgment, hoping she knew what she was doing. Now, that trust was being brutally tested. I felt a shiver. The company, my life's work, was being attacked from within, and Sophia seemed to be a piece in this puzzle, perhaps without full awareness of the implications. I had to act, and fast, before Phoenix was consumed completely. What Mark had told me was the tip of a much larger iceberg, and I knew I had to find out what lay beneath the surface before everything sank. And then something clicked in my mind. a memory of an old conversation, a detail about that man's history that I had dismissed. Mark's information was like a small fissure in a seemingly solid wall, but one that revealed an abyss just behind it. The name of Sophia's fiancé, Ryan, began to resonate with a new and unsettling melody in my mind. I forced myself to go back in time, to recall every interaction, every word exchanged, every gesture. And then, like a snap, the memory surfaced. A casual comment from a friend at a business event years ago about Ryan's track record with a few companies. At the time, I had dismissed it as gossip, giving it no importance. Now, those words took on a new and terrible relevance. That same day, I decided I could no longer wait. I hired a private investigator, a discreet man of few words and a piercing gaze, recommended to me by an old industry colleague. I gave him all the information I had on Ryan and the current situation at Phoenix, emphasizing the urgency and the need for absolute discretion. I needed the truth, concrete proof, to understand the extent of what was happening. The anguish consumed me. It wasn't just the company at risk, it was Sophia, my daughter, who seemed to be entangled in something dangerous, perhaps without realizing it. The days that followed were torture. The waiting was excruciating. The news in the media continued to attack me, and I felt the weight of public opinion turning against me. People I knew, with whom I had built a reputation over decades, now looked at me with suspicion. The messages of support were few, those of condemnation, many. I felt isolated, one man against the world, with only my truth and my determination as a shield. My only hope lay in the investigators' work. Meanwhile, the bomb finally dropped. Using the smear campaign they had orchestrated themselves, Sophia and Ryan, through their lawyers, filed an emergency injunction with the court. The claim was that I was acting in bad faith, using my software patent to destroy an asset of which Sophia was a half-owner. They wanted to force the licensing of my system, alleging that my refusal was an act of deliberate sabotage, detrimental to the interests of the company and its employees. This was a strategic blow, and I recognized the legal savvy behind it, though the motive was perverse. They were using the law itself to disarm me. It seemed that the law might, in fact, side with them. After all, I was the founder, the man who had built this. How could I refuse to license a software that was, in a way, the brain of the company I had created? Their argument was powerful, and I knew I would face a tough battle in court. My mind, accustomed to foreseeing problems in engineering projects, now tried to anticipate the moves of a much more complex and personal game. It was then that the phone rang again. It was the investigator. His voice was calm, almost bored, but the words he uttered made my stomach clench. "Mr. Miller, I have what you asked for, and the truth is uglier than you imagined." That sentence, spoken with such coldness, confirmed my worst fears. I asked him to come to my office immediately, and with every minute that passed, the anxiety grew. I knew I was about to discover something that would change everything, not just for me and the company, but especially for Sophia. When he arrived, punctual and silent as a shadow, I received him in my library, where the dusty books seemed to absorb the tension in the room. He opened a black folder unceremoniously and began to lay out what he had discovered. His report was detailed, with dates, names, locations, and the evidence was irrefutable. Ryan wasn't just an ambitious young man. His history was littered with fraudulent bankruptcies, gutted companies, and swindled shareholders. He was an experienced predator, a wolf in sheep's clothing, and Sophia was his latest and most valuable prey. My throat went dry as he continued to speak. Her fiancé, Ryan, wasn't negotiating to save the company. He was negotiating the sale of our valuable client list and all ongoing projects to our biggest competitor. He planned to sell Phoenix's secrets, empty its coffers, pocket the money, and leave my daughter with the indebted, completely destroyed carcass. She wasn't a queen in command, as he had made her believe. She was a scapegoat, a puppet in a cruel and meticulous plan. The realization hit me with overwhelming force. Everything clicked. Sophia's coldness, the smear campaign, the urgency to disqualify me. It was all part of a larger, wicked plan. I listened to the investigator's words, but I saw Sophia's face, my little girl's face. To think she was being so cruelly deceived, so dangerously manipulated, made my heart bleed. The rage I felt for Ryan was immense, but the pain for Sophia was even greater. She was on the verge of losing everything, not just the company I had built, but her reputation, her future, her innocence. I had to act. It was no longer just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about saving my daughter from an abyss she had inadvertently dug for herself. The court hearing, which once seemed like a threat, now revealed itself as the only chance to expose the truth and prevent the impending catastrophe. The game had changed, and now I held the right cards. But the final play would be the most difficult of all. The investigator's revelation ignited a flame within me. The pain and anger mixed with a cold, calculated determination. I was no longer just defending my legacy. I was protecting my daughter, even if she didn't know it. The days leading up to the hearing were filled with meetings with my lawyer, reviewing every detail, every piece of evidence, every strategy. The dossier the investigator had assembled was robust, filled with bank statements, emails, call logs, and even discreet photos of Ryan meeting with the CEO of our main competitor in unusual places. Every piece of the puzzle fit, revealing a disturbing picture. I felt a mix of sadness and disbelief. How did Sophia not see it? How could she have been so blind? But then I remembered the overwhelming passion of youth, the desire to prove oneself, to break free from a father's shadow. Ryan, with his glib talk and superficial charm, must have exploited that, painting himself as the liberator, the visionary who would help her achieve her dreams. The realization that my daughter, so intelligent and capable, had fallen into such a sordid trap hurt me deeply. I wished I could have warned her sooner, but she had been so closed off, so distant. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. The press was there, hungry for every detail of this corporate saga that had captured the public's attention. Sophia was there, with Ryan by her side, both exuding a false confidence. Her glances at me were cold, filled with resentment, and I wondered if she truly believed the lies Ryan had told about me. She maintained her composure, but the hand holding Ryan's trembled slightly, a detail that did not escape me. Ryan, for his part, wore an arrogant smirk, as if he had already won. Sophia and Ryan's lawyers were the first to present their arguments. They painted me as the jealous father, the despotic businessman who couldn't accept succession, the man who, out of pure spite, was willing to destroy the company he had built. They spoke of my fiduciary duty, of the sabotage of my operating system, of the jobs at risk, using the narrative they had constructed in the media. Every word was a stab, but I remained firm, my gaze fixed on the judge. Waiting for my turn, I knew the truth would be far more compelling than all their accusations. When it was my lawyer's turn, the silence in the room deepened. He didn't start by talking about the software or my patents. He went straight to the point. With calculated calm, he presented a dossier to the judge, a folder identical to the one the investigator had given me. "Your Honor," he began, his voice ringing clear and firm in the room. "We are not here today to discuss a software license, but rather to expose a scheme of fraud and betrayal that is about to destroy Phoenix Engineering and, in the process, the reputation of a young woman." Sophia's eyes widened. Ryan beside her lost his arrogant smirk, replaced by an expression of surprise and a slight tremor in his lip. My lawyer continued, methodical and precise. He presented the evidence of Ryan's secret negotiations with the CEO of our biggest competitor. There were the emails, the call transcripts, the receipts from meetings in discreet hotels. With each revelation, the color seemed to drain from Ryan's face, while Sophia looked at him with a growing mixture of confusion and horror. Then came the coup de grace. My lawyer requested that an audio recording be played. Ryan's voice, unmistakable, discussing the sale of Phoenix's client list and projects, the details of the transaction, the amount he would pocket. The recording was like an electric shock in the room. Sophia, hearing the voice of her fiancé, the man she had trusted, plotting the destruction of her family's company, collapsed in her chair. Tears streamed down her face, not of anger, but of deep pain and disillusionment. She looked small, vulnerable. The facade of the ruthless CEO crumbling before everyone. Ryan, pale and sweating, tried to mutter something but was cut off by the judge. The shock on his face was evident. He had not expected this. He had underestimated my ability to fight back, my determination to protect what was mine, and especially to protect Sophia. My lawyer then presented a financial analysis showing how, in just 1 week under Sophia and Ryan's management, Phoenix Engineering had been driven to the brink of insolvency. The exorbitant spending, the irresponsible sale of assets, it was all there, in cold, irrefutable numbers. The room fell silent again, except for Sophia's muffled sobs. I looked at her. There was no triumph in my heart, only a deep sadness. I didn't want to see her suffer, but it was necessary for her to see the truth, raw and unvarnished, so she could awaken from that illusion. I had given everything for her, and now, paradoxically, I was fighting for her in the only way I knew how, with truth, with reason, with the law. But the battle was not yet over. There was one last piece to be revealed, a trump card that would completely change the fate of Phoenix and perhaps the future of my relationship with Sophia. And I knew this final revelation would be the most impactful of all, capable of shattering any remnant of pride she still had left. The silence that followed the playing of the audio and the presentation of evidence of Ryan's fraud was heavier than any noise. Sophia was devastated, her hands covering her face, her sobs echoing softly in the room. I watched her, my heart aching. It wasn't the triumph I expected to feel, but a deep pain at seeing my daughter so broken, so exposed. The image of her, sitting there, so small and vulnerable, contrasted sharply with the ruthless CEO she had tried to be. She was my girl, the one to whom I had dedicated a lifetime. And seeing her experience such disillusionment was a heavy burden. Ryan, on the other hand, tried to salvage what was left of his dignity. He stood up abruptly, his face red with rage and shame. "This is a sham, Your Honor," he stammered, his voice failing. "A fabrication to defame me. Mr. Miller is orchestrating all of this out of revenge for not accepting the loss of control of his company." His eyes blazed, desperately searching for a loophole, an escape, but his words were empty, lacking the conviction he once flaunted. The judge, with a look of disapproval, banged the gavel. "Silence! The evidence presented is irrefutable, Mr. Prescott. The court will consider the gravity of these accusations." From that moment on, the hearing was no longer about the software license. It transformed into an inquiry into fraud and mismanagement. Sophia's lawyers, once so aggressive, now seemed lost, whispering among themselves, casting apprehensive glances at their client. The illusion of power Ryan had built for Sophia was collapsing under the weight of the evidence. I could see in her eyes the confusion, the betrayal. She looked at Ryan, once her partner and confidant, now a stranger. A manipulator. Then her eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I saw a spark of something that looked like shame, perhaps even a silent plea for help. My lawyer approached me, his expression serious. "Jack, his position is untenable. The fraud is clear, But the company, Phoenix, is at risk of liquidation due to mismanagement. We need a plan not just to expose Ryan, but to save Phoenix from the financial collapse he's caused. I nodded. The goal was never to destroy what I had built, but to protect it, and to protect Sophia from herself and her poor choices. Phoenix was more than a company. It was a monument to my life, a legacy that couldn't simply be undone. During the court's recess, Ryan was confronted by his own lawyers, who seemed to be distancing themselves from him like ships abandoning a sinking vessel. He tried to argue, to gesture, but with each attempt he seemed to sink deeper. His arrogance had given way to a poorly disguised panic. I watched him from a distance, remembering the initial gleam in his eyes, now replaced by a desperate emptiness. He was a man who built castles of sand, and the tide of truth was washing it all away. Sophia remained in her seat, isolated. The few directors who had previously supported her now avoided her, their gazes averted. Her fiancé, to whom she had given her trust and a position of power, was becoming a pariah. That moment of isolation was crucial for her. The instant when reality imposed itself without filters. The loneliness at the top was something she was not prepared to face, especially when the top was, in fact, an abyss. I believe it was then that she began to understand the true depth of the hole she was in. My lawyer returned, holding a folder he had kept hidden until now. "Jack, the judge is leaning toward a more in-depth investigation into Phoenix's recent financial activities, but that could take time. And the company doesn't have that time. The cannibalization of the machines, the accounts payable, everything points to an imminent collapse. We need to take a more drastic measure to ensure the continuity of operations and protect the assets." I knew what he was implying. There was a card I had not yet played, a final move I was saving as a last resort. I had built Phoenix not just with my sweat and intellect, but also with personal financial sacrifices. I looked at the folder in his hands, at my daughter crying in a corner, and at Ryan, who now seemed small and insignificant, a puppet whose strings had been cut. It was time to act. Not as a vengeful father, but as a founder who would do whatever it took to save his creation. The judge, sensing the seriousness of the company's financial situation, called a brief recess to deliberate. It was at that moment that my lawyer, with a determined look, turned to me. "It's now. Jack, the last card, the one that changes everything." He opened the folder and took out a time-yellowed document, a contract that, in the wrong hands, might have been forgotten, but in mine would be the key to salvation. A personal loan made by me years ago to finance the expansion that would make us a market leader. A loan I never collected on until now. The time to use it had come. My daughter thought she had thrown me out of the company, but she didn't know that I was, silently, its largest creditor. And with the mismanagement, the default clauses had been triggered. The company she stole from me was now, by right, about to belong to me. The atmosphere in the courtroom had transformed. The hearing, which had begun as a dispute over software, had morphed into a stage for the revelation of a scheme of fraud and irresponsibility. Sophia, her face swollen and marked by tears, was still in her seat, but her eyes no longer showed resentment, but a mixture of shock, shame, and, I would dare say, a hint of helplessness. Ryan, meanwhile, was visibly shaken, his proud posture completely shattered, muttering inaudible excuses to his own lawyers, who now looked at him with professional disbelief. When the judge returned to the room, his expression was serious, filled with a gravity that foreshadowed something decisive. He briefly summarized the evidence presented against Ryan, listing the proof of fraud, the attempted misappropriation of assets, and the mismanagement that had brought Phoenix to the brink of collapse. With each word, reality seemed to weigh even more heavily on Sophia's shoulders, and she shrank slightly. I felt a pang of pity for her, but also the certainty that this harsh lesson was perhaps the only way for her to see the truth. Then, My lawyer stood up again, holding the yellow document firmly. He asked to speak, and the judge granted it with a nod. The room fell into absolute silence, all eyes fixed on him. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm but imbued with a quiet authority. "Beyond Mr. Prescott's egregious conduct and the evident mismanagement that has shaken Phoenix Engineering, there is another crucial fact that must be brought to light. A fact that may be the only salvation for the future of this company and its employees." He paused dramatically, his gaze sweeping across the room until his eyes met Sophia's, who seemed to be staring at him as if awaiting a final sentence. "Years ago," my lawyer continued, "when Phoenix Engineering needed a major boost to expand its operations and become the powerhouse it is today, Mr. Jack Miller, the company's founder and creator, made a substantial personal loan to the company itself, a loan that for years he never collected on Geos, prioritizing the growth and stability of Phoenix above his own financial interests." A murmur went through the room. Most of those present, including Sophia, were unaware of this loan. They knew of my dedication to the company, but this was a demonstration of commitment that went beyond the usual. I, who had always been discreet about my personal finances, had kept this detail a secret, considering it an investment in my passion, in my vision. Sophia lifted her head, her eyes wide, and looked at me. I just gave a slight nod, confirming the truth of my lawyer's words. A new layer of shock and perhaps a glimmer of understanding crossed her face. "With the company's recent mismanagement," my lawyer went on, his voice gaining strength, "caused primarily by the actions of Mr. Prescott and the subsequent administrative negligence, Phoenix Engineering finds itself in a state of severe default, and, according to the clauses of this loan agreement, which was duly registered and signed by all relevant parties at the time, the conditions of default have been triggered." He handed the document to the judge, who took it and began to read it carefully, his glasses slipping slightly down his nose. The silence in the room was so intense, it felt as if everyone was holding their breath. Sophia, visibly confused, looked at Ryan, who appeared to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown, his face pale and his eyes scanning the room for an escape. He had finally realized the extent of the trap he had helped build, and now he was caught in it. My lawyer waited for the judge to finish reading. Then, with his gaze focused on Sophia, he spoke the words that would seal the company's fate and reveal the true depth of my sacrifice. "This means, Your Honor, that Mr. Jack Miller is not just the betrayed founder, he is also Phoenix Engineering's primary creditor, and, with the activation of the default clauses, Mr. Jack Miller has the legal right to execute the debt, which, given the company's financial circumstances, would lead to the liquidation of assets to settle it." The revelation landed like a bombshell. The company that Sophia and Ryan had tried to steal from me, the company they were destroying from the inside, now, by right of execution, belonged to me again. The judge looked at me, then at Sophia, his eyes conveying a deep understanding of the complexity of this family and corporate drama. Sophia collapsed again, but this time they weren't just tears of pain and humiliation. They were tears of despair, of a reality she never imagined facing. She had thought she had taken everything from me, but in truth, I owned everything, and she had just found that out in the cruelest way possible. The courtroom, once the stage of her ascent, now bore witness to her free fall, and I, her father, was the only one who could extend a hand if she was willing to take it. The courtroom plunged into a stunned silence following my lawyer's revelation. It wasn't just the legal gravity of my right to execute the debt, but the personal dimension it represented. Sophia was slumped in her chair, her shoulders shaking, her sobs now more audible. Her world, built on false promises and unchecked ambition, was crashing down loudly. Ryan's eyes, once full of arrogance, now reflected an animalistic terror. He knew his schemes had come to an end, and the price would be high. The judge, with a grave expression, declared a recess so the parties could process the information and Sophia's lawyers could consult. The scene that followed was chaotic. Ryan, in a fit of desperation, tried to approach Sophia, but she ignored him completely, her hands still covering her face. He then tried to approach me, likely seeking some desperate negotiation, but my lawyer intervened, ensuring he couldn't get close. Ryan, realizing there was no way out, shot one last look of hatred in my direction and then practically fled the courtroom, disappearing through a side door without even a glance back at Sophia. There was the final proof of his cowardice and his character. He was a rat, fleeing the ship he had helped sink. I watched Sophia from a distance. No one approached her. Her own lawyers seemed embarrassed, exchanging nervous glances. It was a cruel but necessary isolation. I wished I could go to her, hug her, and tell her everything would be all right, but I knew this wound had to be felt. The pain of betrayal and illusion had to be experienced in its entirety for the healing to begin. She was my daughter, and my heart ached, but I knew that sometimes the most painful truth is the best medicine. The murmurs in the room were incessant. The story of Phoenix Engineering had suddenly taken on the contours of a Greek tragedy, with the founding father forced to reclaim his empire. The press, with their flashes and insistent questions, surrounded what was left of Sophia's legal team. I remained silent, letting my lawyer handle the questions. My focus was on Sophia, on her state of mind. I needed to know if the shock had finally opened her eyes. The next day, the phone rang. It was a number I knew, but the voice on the other end was different. It wasn't the panicked voice of someone whose production line was down. It was a choked, deeply sad voice, almost a whisper. It was Sophia. "Dad," she said, the word coming out with difficulty. "The marshal is at the door, with an order to liquidate assets, to pay the debt, to you." I closed my eyes. The news didn't surprise me, but hearing it from her mouth with such resignation was like a blow. What had been a cold legal strategy was now materializing as a brutal reality. The company she stole from me now belonged to me by right of execution. "I know." "Sweetheart," I replied, my voice as calm as I could keep it. It was the only way to save what was left. There was a long silence, only her heavy breathing on the other end of the line. The irony of the situation was overwhelming. She had fired me, called me useless, and now I was the only person who could pull her from the depths, and she knew it. "Ryan's gone," she murmured, her voice barely audible. He disappeared, not answering his phone, not at home. He ran. A part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction, knowing he got what he deserved, but the other part felt her pain. The betrayal by her fiancé was the deepest wound, the final blow to her faith. "I figured," I said, unsurprised. "He's a man who only thinks of himself." She let out a long, shaky sigh. "What do I do now, Dad? I've lost everything. The company, my name, everything." Her voice was broken, without the slightest trace of her former arrogance. It was the voice of my daughter, lost and scared, and in that moment I knew the lesson, however painful, had been learned. The facade had fallen, and what remained was a soul seeking redemption. "Come home, Sophia," I said, keeping my voice firm, but with an underlying gentleness only a father can have. "We need to talk, alone." I hung up the phone and prepared myself. I knew the conversation would be long, difficult, filled with tears and perhaps accusations, but I also knew it was our chance, our only chance, to rebuild not a company, but a family, to reclaim a daughter I thought I had lost to ambition and disillusionment. The company could be rebuilt, but our relationship, our connection, was what truly mattered. Night fell, and the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there she was, alone, her face marked by suffering, her eyes red and swollen. but with a fragility I hadn't seen in a long time. The girl who had fired me from my own life was back, and I knew the real battle, the battle for Sophia's soul, was just beginning, right there on my doorstep. The doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, there she was. Not the arrogant CEO who had confronted me in the boardroom, nor the confident figure who had sat beside Ryan in court. It was Sophia, my daughter, reduced to her most vulnerable essence. Her face was tear-stained, her eyes swollen and red, and her posture stooped as if she were carrying the weight of the world. She carried no luggage, just a small handbag, a sign that her escape from the company's chaos had been abrupt. The fragile image before me was that of a lost, completely disoriented woman. My heart tightened. I wanted to run to her, to hug her, and tell her everything would be okay, but I restrained myself. I knew this moment was delicate, a watershed between the past and what could be our future. I needed to be firm, yet at the same time offer the safe harbor she needed. "Come in, Sophia," I said, my voice low and calm, opening the door wider. She nodded, unable to look me in the eye, and entered, her hesitant steps echoing in the silence of my home. I led her to the living room, to the same couch where I had so often seen her sit as a little girl, listening to my stories before bed. She sat on the edge, her hands clasped, her shoulders tense. I sat in the armchair across from her, giving her space, allowing her to process the flood of emotions consuming her. The silence stretched on, filled only by the ticking of the old clock on the mantelpiece. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice hoarse and low. "Dad, I'm so sorry." The words came out in an almost inaudible whisper, but they were laden with genuine pain. She didn't cry, but her watery eyes revealed her internal battle. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. He deceived me." With each word, her voice gained a little more strength. The need to explain, to justify herself, was palpable. "I believed him, Dad," she continued, now looking at me, her eyes filled with deep anguish. "He told me you were outdated, that you weren't giving me room to grow, that you were sabotaging me. He convinced me that you were an obstacle, that the company needed a new vision, my vision. And in my arrogance, I believed him." She paused, taking a deep breath, as if trying to hold back a dam of tears. "I wanted to prove to you, to everyone, that I was capable, that I could be as good as you, or even better." She began to cry again, this time without restraint, the tears flowing freely down her face. "He made me feel strong, Dad. He made me feel like I was the queen, that I was in control. And I wanted so badly to believe it. I wanted your recognition, your approval, so badly, but in a way that was all my own." Her sobs prevented her from continuing. I listened, and each of her words was a blow, but also a relief. It was the truth, the vulnerability I had longed to see. "I saw the documents in court, Dad," she managed to say between sobs. "I saw the evidence of the secret deal, his schemes, and the financial analysis. How could I have been so blind? How could I let him destroy the company you built with so much sacrifice?" She looked at me, her eyes searching for an answer I couldn't give, only a truth she needed to accept. "And the loan, Dad. You never told me. You invested so much of yourself, and I called you useless." The last word was almost a cry of pain, of regret. I stood up and went to her, sitting beside her on the couch. I placed my hand gently on her back. She flinched at my touch but didn't pull away. "Sophia," I said, my voice soft, "ambition can be a powerful force, but when it blinds us to the truth and pulls us away from our values, it becomes dangerous. I built Phoenix with love, with integrity, with a vision of a future that included you. I wanted you to take over, but not like this, not at any cost." "I know that now, Dad," she murmured, her head bowed. "And I didn't see the web he was weaving. I was so focused on proving my worth that I got lost. I lost myself, I lost the company, and I nearly lost you." Her words were a balm to my wounded soul. I had her back, at least in part. But there was still a long road ahead. The company was in my hands again, but the emotional debt was immense. She lifted her head. Her eyes, though still red, had a new light in them, a spark of determination mixed with a new-found humility. "What's going to happen now, Dad?" she asked, her voice still choked, but with a thread of hope. I looked into her eyes, feeling the weight of my decision. It wouldn't be easy, but I had a plan, a path for her, not back to wealth, but to honor. It was a chance for redemption, an opportunity to rebuild one brick at a time. And I knew this would be the hardest part of her journey, and perhaps of mine as well. I needed to help her find the true value of building, not inheriting or stealing. And I was willing to go to the ends of the earth to see her shine again, but with the light of her own integrity. The air in the room was heavy, yet charged with a new, albeit fragile, hope. Sophia looked at me with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity, awaiting my answer. I knew that what I said next would shape not only the future of Phoenix Engineering, but the very essence of our relationship. It was time to plant the seeds of a new Sophia, one who understood the true value of work and integrity. "Sophia," I began, my voice firm, but with the tenderness only a father feels. "Phoenix Engineering now belongs to me by right of execution. The company you thought you had inherited and that Ryan tried to destroy is back in my hands. But this is not a return to square one, and it's certainly not a personal victory for me. It's a chance to rebuild." She listened intently, her head tilted slightly, her eyes fixed on mine. "You asked what's going to happen now," I continued, "and the answer is simple, yet at the same time, the hardest thing you'll ever hear. You will have a path, but not back to the CEO's office, nor to a 50% partnership. Not for now. The lesson you need to learn isn't about losing an empire, but about the value of building one screw at a time." Her expression shifted. I could see the confusion in her eyes, perhaps a pang of disappointment, but also a quiet acceptance. She knew she deserved no privileges now. "I'm not destroying you, Sophia," I reinforced, knowing this was the most crucial part of my message. "I'm rehiring you, not as a director, not as a manager. I'm rehiring you as an unpaid intern in the quality control department." The words fell into the room like small stones. The quality control department. It was the same place I had started, years and years ago, when Phoenix was just a dream in my mind. Quality control, where every part was rigorously examined, where perfection was sought in every detail, where there was no room for error or oversight. It was the foundation, the bedrock of everything. Sophia stared at me with wide eyes, surprise evident on her face. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. It was a shock, but a necessary one. I knew it was a drastic measure, but it was the only way for her to truly understand what hard work, dedication, and respect for every step of the process mean. "There, Sophia," I explained, "you will learn again what the foundation of our company is. You will learn the value of every worker, every part, every stage of production. You will understand the importance of attention to detail, of responsibility, and of humility. You will see Phoenix from a completely different perspective, from the bottom up, just as I saw it when I started." Her silence was profound, but it wasn't one of rebellion. It was a silence of reflection. I could see the whirlwind of thoughts in her eyes. The fall from a throne to an intern's stool, a total reversal of her reality. It was a necessary humiliation for her growth. She needed to feel the dust, smell the grease, the weight of a responsibility that wasn't just about numbers and strategies, but about the final product, about the quality we promised our customers. "It won't be easy, Sophia," I warned her. "It will be the hardest thing you've ever done. You will have to prove yourself not to me, but to yourself, to your colleagues, to the company. There will be no privileges, no special treatment. You will be just another person, learning all over again, from scratch. My voice was firm. There was no room for negotiation. She lowered her head again, but this time it wasn't out of despair, but acceptance. When she looked up, there was a new light in her eyes, a spark of something that looked like determination. "I understand, Dad," she said, her voice still hoarse, but with a conviction I hadn't heard in a long time. "I'll do whatever it takes. I want to learn again. I want to prove that I deserve your respect and the respect of Phoenix." In that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. I had lost a partner. But maybe, just maybe, I was on the path to getting my daughter back. The journey would be long and arduous for both of us. But the seed of redemption had been planted. I hadn't destroyed her. I had given her the chance to rebuild herself, brick by brick, screw by screw, and I would be there, watching, supporting, but letting her walk her own path, so she could find her true worth, far from the illusions of power and the influence of men like Ryan. Phoenix would be her new battlefield, and this time she would fight not for ambition but for honor. The days following our conversation were filled with a palpable tension, but also a necessary quiet. Sophia accepted the condition, and I watched her with a mixture of pride and concern. She began her journey in the quality control department, not without initial suspicion from the employees. I knew the news of her rehiring in such a humble position had spread through the company like wildfire, and many must have been curious, others perhaps even pleased with the fall of the once powerful CEO. I instructed the department head, a loyal and wise man named Robert, who had been with me since the early days, to treat her like any other intern. No privileges, no shortcuts. Sophia, to her surprise and my satisfaction, threw herself into the task. She learned to operate the inspection machines, to identify microscopic flaws in components, to fill out detailed reports. She saw the sweat of the workers, the dedication of the technicians, the importance of every gear in the functioning of a complex whole. What impressed me most was her humility. There were no complaints, no temper tantrums, no signs of her former arrogance. She watched, asked questions, learned. I remember one day seeing her from a distance, in grease-stained coveralls, examining a part under a magnifying glass. Her hair, once impeccably styled, was a bit disheveled. It was such a different image from the woman I saw in the boardroom that I could hardly believe it. There was the Sophia I knew as a child, curious and eager for knowledge, before power and ambition blinded her. Our evening conversations became more frequent and profound. She would tell me about her day, about the difficulties of understanding the processes, about the patience required for manual labor. I listened, and in her accounts I saw the awakening of a new consciousness. "Dad," she told me one night, her eyes shining, "I spent the whole morning with Mark today. He taught me about calibrating one of the oldest machines. It's incredible how every tiny adjustment makes a huge difference in the final result. I never imagined the complexity behind something I considered so trivial." Mark, my loyal hardware engineer, was one of the first to extend a hand to Sophia. I knew that, out of his loyalty to me, he might have held a grudge, but his kindness was greater. He treated her like a true apprentice, with patience and respect, and Sophia, in turn, listened to him intently, absorbing every lesson. Those two, who had once been on opposite sides of a battle, were now collaborating for a common purpose: to rebuild Phoenix. The weeks turned into months. The company, under my interim management, began to recover. I reorganized the finances, cut the excess, and with the help of Mark and other loyal employees, began to reactivate the production lines. The operating system was back online, bringing life back to the silent machines. Phoenix Engineering, as its name suggested, was rising from the ashes. But the biggest transformation was happening within Sophia. She was reconnecting with manual work, with the essence of engineering. And, more importantly, she was reconnecting with people. I remember seeing her having lunch in the factory cafeteria, laughing with the workers, something I never imagined I would see. She, who had once maintained a professional distance, now allowed herself to be part of the team. One gear among many. One day, Sophia approached me in my office, a different glint in her eye. "Dad," she began, her voice a little hesitant but with a growing conviction, "I have an idea. A way to optimize the inspection process in quality control using a technology I saw being developed at a small startup before everything happened." She had spent months observing, learning, and now she was ready to contribute for real. My heart swelled with pride. This was the Sophia I always knew existed, the passionate engineer, the innovator. I encouraged her to develop the idea, to present a proposal, and she did, with contagious enthusiasm. She had rediscovered her passion, but this time with the humility and experience she had previously lacked. Her proposal was intelligent, feasible, and above all, demonstrated a deep understanding of the challenges and opportunities. I knew Sophia's path to redemption was still long, but she had taken giant leaps. Every day, she rebuilt her reputation, one brick at a time, not with power, but with sweat and dedication. Phoenix was rising, and Sophia was rising with it. But there was still one last piece to be fitted, an internal conflict that needed to be resolved, a family truth that needed to be spoken for the healing to be complete. And that final revelation, I knew, would come from me. Sophia's transformation was visible and palpable. She was no longer the silent, contrite intern. She had become an active and valuable presence in quality control. Her idea to optimize the inspection process was not only approved, but she herself led the team to implement it, working side by side with Mark and the technicians. The initiative resulted in significant savings and improved efficiency, and the team's morale, once shaken, began to rise with her example. I saw her interacting with her colleagues, her light laughter echoing through the halls, and my heart overflowed with a joy I hadn't felt in a long time. Our nightly conversations were now lighter, less laden with regret, and more focused on projects, solutions, and the company's future. She still didn't mention the past with Ryan, nor the moment of her firing, but I knew those wounds were still there, waiting for the right time to be addressed. I also had my own issues to resolve, a weight I had carried for years, something that needed to be revealed so our relationship could be truly healed. One day, as we were walking together through the factory corridors, she stopped in front of one of the machines that had previously been idle due to the software lockdown. "Dad," she said, her voice a little choked, "I still don't understand how I could have been so blind. How could I not see what Ryan was doing? How could I not realize the importance of your system, of your work, for all of this?" This was the moment to address the elephant in the room, the wound that was still open between us. I took a deep breath and called her to my office. She followed me, her expression of curiosity mixed with a hint of apprehension. I sat in my chair, and she in the one that used to be hers, across from my desk. "Sophia," I began, "there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago, but that life, and perhaps my own pride, prevented me from doing." She looked at me, her eyes fixed on mine, sensing the seriousness of my tone. "When you were a little girl, your mother, well, she always wanted you to follow a different path. She dreamed of seeing you as an artist, maybe a musician. She believed that engineering was too arid, too masculine a world for you." Sophia's expression changed. Her lips parted in surprise. Her mother had passed away when she was very young, and I had never spoken much about her dreams, about our differences. "Your mother and I had many arguments about your future," I continued, my voice thick with memories. "I, on the other hand, always wanted you to love engineering as much as I did, to follow in my footsteps, to take my place at Phoenix. I encouraged you, perhaps too much, to come to the company, and maybe, because of that, I failed to see your own search for identity, your need to assert yourself beyond my shadow." Tears began to stream down Sophia's face again, but this time they were tears of understanding, of a new perspective on her own story. "I feel that, in a way," I went on, my voice heavy with regret, "I pushed you down a path that was, in essence, mine. I wanted you to inherit my dream, but maybe I didn't give you enough space to find your own. And Ryan, with his cunning, took advantage of that void, of your desire to prove yourself independently, to break free from my influence." Sophia stood up and came to my desk, her eyes filled with a deep emotion. "Dad," she said, her voice choked, "I always felt that pressure, that need to be Jack Miller's daughter, to live up to your legacy. I thought the only way to do that was to surpass you, to get you out of the way, to show that I could do things my way, without you." She paused, taking a deep breath. "Ryan gave me that illusion. He told me this was my chance to be the queen of my own castle, without your shadow. But he was setting me up to be the castle's downfall, not its queen." I stood up and hugged her. It was a hug that was decades in the making, a hug that sealed not just forgiveness, but mutual understanding. Words flowed amidst our sobs. "I should have been more open about this, Sophia. I should have told you about your mother's dreams, about my own expectations, and about the importance of you finding your own path, even if it was in engineering, but with your own voice." The hug was long, a balm for our souls. The truth, however painful, set us free. She pulled away, her eyes still moist, but with a gleam of clarity. "I understand now, Dad. I wasn't just fighting against you. I was fighting against my own history, against expectations, and against the need to prove myself. Ryan just took advantage of a wound that was already there." That moment was the emotional climax of our journey. It wasn't just the company that was being rebuilt, but our family, our love. I had lost a partner, but I had found my daughter again, and she, in turn, was finding herself, not as the successor, but as a strong, capable woman with her own voice and her own vision. Phoenix was the stage for her transformation, and I, her father, was there to witness her rebirth, not as a CEO, but as a woman in search of her true essence. And our story was about to find its conclusion, a new beginning, built on truth and forgiveness. With the truth revealed and the hug that sealed years of silence and misunderstanding, the atmosphere between us became lighter and more transparent. Sophia had found not only a way back to Phoenix, but a way back to herself. Her journey in quality control, initially a punishment at D, had transformed into a phase of learning and rediscovery. She not only contributed her intelligence and innovations, but also a new perspective on the importance of every link in the production chain. The months passed. Phoenix Engineering, under my careful supervision and with the renewed energy of a motivated team, regained its footing. The machines were back to full capacity, ongoing projects were resumed, and the company's reputation, once tarnished by negative headlines, began to be restored with a focus on excellence and innovation, pillars I had always championed. Sophia, in her new role, became a respected voice, not because of her title, but because of the merit of her work and her remarkable personal transformation. She led the quality control team with contagious enthusiasm, improving processes and fostering a collaborative environment. One morning, I called Sophia to my office. The leather chair that had once been hers, across from my desk, had been empty for a long time. This time, however, I invited her to sit in it. She looked at me with genuine surprise but accepted, a slight apprehension in her eyes. I smiled. "Sophia," I began, "the company is stable again. We've recovered lost ground and we're stronger than ever, and a lot of that is due to your hard work, your dedication, and your ability to learn and adapt." She blushed slightly, a gesture of humility that was a stark contrast to her previous demeanor. "Thank you, Dad," she said, her voice soft. I've learned so much in this time, more than in any college or executive position. I know, I replied, and that's why I have a proposal for you. I took a document from my drawer and slid it across the desk toward her. It was a new contract. I'm rehiring you, no longer as an intern and not as CEO, at least not yet. I'm rehiring you as Director of Operations and Innovation. Sophia's eyes widened. She took the document, her hands trembling slightly as she read. The Director of Operations and Innovation was a position of great responsibility, one that combined her management experience with her passion for new technologies. It was a role that would put her in command of much of the production process and the development of new solutions, allowing her to fully utilize her talent and vision. And it's a position that demands a lot of dedication and responsibility, Sophia, I explained. But I know you're ready. You've proven your worth, your leadership ability, and most importantly, your integrity. It's not a return to the position you had before, but it's a path for you to build your own legacy with your own voice based on everything you've learned and developed. She looked up from the document, her eyes filled with tears of joy and gratitude. Dad, I don't know what to say. I didn't expect this. Her voice was choked, but there was a gleam of hope and enthusiasm I hadn't seen in a long time. Don't expect gratitude, Sophia, I said gently. Expect responsibility. This is your new beginning. A chance to build, to create, to innovate, but with the wisdom you've acquired. And this time, you won't be alone. You'll have a team that respects you and believes in you. And I'll be here to support you. Not as your boss, but as your father and mentor. She stood up, her eyes misty, and came to me, hugging me tightly. Thank you, Dad, for believing in me, for giving me a second chance, for showing me the way back. The hug was more than a thank you. It was the reconnection of two hearts, the healing of years of distance. In that embrace, I felt the weight of the past dissipate. Ryan had vanished from our lives, a painful chapter that, ironically, had propelled us toward this redemption. Phoenix Engineering had weathered the storm, and Sophia had emerged stronger, wiser. The central conflicts were resolved, the narrative arcs closed, but not without leaving scars that would serve as reminders of a difficult journey. The company now had a new energy, a new leadership in the making. Sophia, with her renewed passion and new perspective, was ready to build the future, not as the heiress, but as the architect of her own success, and I, finally, could look to the future with the certainty that my greatest project, my daughter's future, was in good hands, her hands, forged in experience and humility. Phoenix was whole again, and the family more than ever was united. The days unfolded into weeks, the weeks into months, and Phoenix Engineering flourished under a new shared leadership and a renewed spirit. Sophia, as Director of Operations and Innovation, embraced the challenge with a passion and competence that filled me with pride. She not only implemented the optimization in quality control she had proposed, but also led the introduction of new automation technologies, always with a concern for balancing efficiency with employee well-being. The experience on the factory floor and the humility she acquired transformed her into an empathetic leader who listened to everyone, from the line worker to the senior engineer. I, for my part, took on the role of chairman of the board, a more strategic and less operational position. My greatest joy, however, came from watching Sophia, seeing her enthusiasm when presenting a new project, her determination when facing a technical problem, and especially the way she interacted with the team, with respect and trust, was the true reward. The company I built with my own hands now had a new life, a new soul, shaped by my daughter's resilience and wisdom. Our home, which once seemed a place of heavy silences, became a refuge of light conversations and laughter. We talked about everything: Phoenix, our dreams, the lessons learned. Sophia, now more mature, understood the complexity of human relationships and the importance of the values I had always tried to instill in her. One day, she surprised me by suggesting we create a mentorship program for young female engineers, inspired by her own journey of rediscovery. It moved me deeply. It was proof that the pain had turned into purpose, the fall into inspiration. The wound of Ryan's betrayal, though still a scar, was no longer an open sore. He had disappeared without a trace, taking his empty ambition with him. Sophia, for her part, had understood that self-respect and integrity were far more valuable than any external validation. She had reconnected with the essence of who she was, a talented engineer and a kind-hearted woman, free from the shackles of vanity and the illusion of power. I remember one afternoon, as we were having coffee on my porch, watching the sunset. She took my hand. "Dad," she said, her voice soft, "I know Phoenix rose again because of your love for it, but I feel like I was reborn too. Thank you for not giving up on me, for showing me that value isn't in a title, but in character, in honest work, and in the ability to get back up after a fall." I squeezed her hand. "Sophia, the biggest project of my life was never Phoenix Engineering. It was you. And seeing you become the woman you are today, with this wisdom and this strength, is the greatest achievement I could ever wish for. I didn't destroy you. I helped you find yourself, and in doing so, I found myself again too." That moment was the closing, not of a book, but of a turbulent chapter in our lives. The journey of suffering and overcoming had reached a complete emotional resolution. Phoenix Engineering was thriving, not just as a company, but as a testament that integrity and passion can overcome the darkest adversities. Sophia, my daughter, was building her own path, with her own light, a light that was now much brighter and more authentic. I learned that sometimes you have to tear down to rebuild, and that the most painful falls can be the launch pads for the greatest transformations. Life presents us with obstacles, yes, but it is in how we face them that our true strength lies. Phoenix Engineering was not just a warehouse of metal, it was a symbol of rebirth, and my Sophia, the girl who once called me useless, was now living proof that justice, altruism, and human connection are the true pillars of any lasting construction. And I, with my heart full, knew that my legacy was in firm, worthy, and above all, loving hands.